I never imagined that one day I would be telling this story out loud. For years, I convinced myself that silence was the safest place to hide. I buried every memory beneath layers of prayer, guilt, and obedience. But the truth has a way of resurfacing, quietly at first, then louder than any church bell. And today, I can't hold it back anymore. You see, behind the walls of the convent, where everything seemed so peaceful and holy, I lived something forbidden, something I didn't plan, didn't expect. And yet, it changed my entire existence. I know that what I'm about to say might shock some, others will judge, but maybe, just maybe, someone out there needs to hear it. Maybe someone is living a secret love, scared to even name it. And if that's you, stay with me. This isn't just a story about breaking the rules, it's about discovering the kind of love that refuses to be silenced. It all began on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, when I first laid eyes on her. ChatGPT Rotarista. I was 19 when I entered the convent. Life outside had always been too loud, too painful, too uncertain. I thought that giving my life to God would bring me peace, that here, within these stone walls, I could finally find safety from the chaos of the world. I followed every rule, every schedule. I prayed until my knees were sore and my voice hoarse, and for a while, it worked. The quiet, the order, the distance from everything I once knew. It all felt like healing, until she arrived. Her name was Sister Alina, a new novice, assigned to our convent after transferring from another region. She was quiet, reserved, but her eyes held a gentleness that made me pause. At first, we were strangers simply performing the same duties, but something began to shift. Not suddenly. No, it was in the small things, the way she smiled when we passed in the corridor, the calmness in her voice during evening prayers, and one morning, during kitchen duty, our hands touched over a loaf of bread. Just a second, just a touch, but I felt it. I think she did too. ChatGPT Rotarista. Now, don't get me wrong, in the beginning, I told myself it was nothing, a momentary distraction, an innocent warmth between sisters. But that lie didn't last long. The more we worked together, the more I began to crave her presence. I found excuses to be assigned to the same tasks. I'd glance at her during Mass and feel something stirred deep inside, something I didn't yet have the courage to name. Have you ever felt drawn to someone in a way that defies all logic? That's what this was. I didn't want to feel it, and I prayed. Oh, how I prayed for those emotions to disappear. But they didn't. Instead, they grew. And one day, when I found a folded note tucked beneath my book in the library, my hands trembled. It was from her. Just a few lines, a psalm, nothing more. But I knew what she was trying to say between the verses, that I wasn't alone in this, that she felt it too. That terrified me, and yet, it also made my heart feel alive. For the first time in years. I was just 19 when I arrived at the convent, clutching a small suitcase and the remains of a broken past I didn't know how to carry. My life outside those stone walls had been filled with noise, not just the kind you hear in the streets, but the kind that screams inside your mind when everything feels wrong. Home was never truly home. My parents loved me in their own way, but it was a love wrapped in conditions and silence. I had questions that no one wanted to answer, emotions that didn't fit the mold. So, when I discovered the convent, it felt like an escape, a holy shelter, a place where I could surrender my confusion and find peace in obedience. They welcomed me with warm hands and soft smiles, promising a life of purpose and clarity. And, in the beginning, it truly did feel like salvation. My days became structured: morning prayers, chores, silence, reflection, study, the same rhythm, over and over. It was predictable, safe. That's what I needed. Or at least, that's what I thought I needed. The silence at first was comforting, like being held by something bigger than myself. I didn't have to make choices. I didn't have to question my feelings. I just had to follow. Wake at 5, pray until 7, clean, serve, learn, reflect, repeat. There was a certain relief in not thinking too much, in believing that every emotion could be subdued by faith. But deep inside, there was still a faint, persistent flicker of something I couldn't name, a longing I had buried so deep, I almost forgot it was there. Almost. The other sisters were kind, but distant. There was love, but it was the kind built on duty, not intimacy. And I told myself that was enough. That God would fill every gap. That He would be my companion, my comfort, my answer to every lonely moment. But as much as I wanted that to be true, something inside of me whispered otherwise, something restless, something waiting. I didn't know it yet, but that silence I had embraced so willingly would soon become the place where everything I had hidden would come to life. The convent was a world entirely separate from anything I had known. Inside, everything moved slower, as if time obeyed different rules. Days weren't marked by news, birthdays, or seasons. They were marked by bells, one for waking, another for prayer, another for meals. And between those bells, we lived in a kind of stillness. No phones, no music, no mirrors. We were taught that simplicity brought us closer to God, that removing distractions would quiet the soul, and maybe it did for some. But for me, it also gave space to thoughts I didn't know how to silence. Each sister had her place, her task, her rhythm. Mine was often in the garden or kitchen, hands in the soil or warm dough, always creating, always serving. There was something sacred about that, something peaceful. But even in peace, the mind wanders. And in that quiet, I began to notice things I hadn't before. A glance, a pause, a presence. One particular sister, Alina, would pass by during evening duties. Our conversations were brief, often limited to tasks. But I started to feel something shift in the air when she was near. A certain tension, a certain warmth. Nothing was said, nothing needed to be. You have to understand, in that place, even feelings were censored. We weren't forbidden to care for each other. Love among sisters was encouraged. But there were limits, boundaries, unspoken rules that we all understood without ever discussing. There was a difference between kindness and connection, between duty and desire. And what I began to feel when she was near wasn't something I could explain with doctrine. It wasn't something I could confess in the chapel. It was a pull, gentle, but undeniable. Her voice calmed me in a way no prayer ever had. Her laugh, rare but sincere, echoed in my mind even after she had walked away. I began to anticipate the moments we might cross paths. I noticed how she braided her hair, how she tucked her rosary into her habit. And one day, while wiping down the pews in the chapel, I caught her looking at me, not just looking, but truly seeing me. Our eyes locked for a second too long, just 1 second, but in that moment, I felt everything change. The silence no longer felt safe. It felt charged, alive, and terrifying. It started with the smallest of things, a simple assignment to clean the cloister garden together. That was how they paired us, with no second thought. We were just two young novices following the same schedule, but to me, it felt orchestrated by something much greater. I remember the afternoon light pouring through the arches, casting soft shadows over the stone floor. We knelt side by side, pulling weeds in silence. At first, we spoke only about the soil, the stubborn roots, the herbs we were replanting, but slowly, our conversations deepened, one innocent question at a time. Where did you grow up? What was your favorite hymn as a child? Do you ever miss home? She had a way of answering that made you want to keep asking. Her voice didn't feel rehearsed like the others. It wasn't wrapped in formality or distance. It was human, real, and I hadn't realized how starved I was for something real until I heard it. Each day we were assigned together felt like a secret gift. I would memorize every word she said, then repeat them to myself at night as if they were prayers. One morning, as we were hanging linen in the sun, our hands brushed again. This time we both froze, not out of fear, but recognition. Something passed between us in that moment. A silent acknowledgement. I saw it in her eyes. She was just as confused as I was, just as afraid, and just as unable to ignore whatever this was. From then on, the world inside the convent began to feel different. The routine was the same, but my awareness had shifted. I would search for her at every mealtime, during every prayer. I began to measure the day not by the bells, but by the seconds I got to stand near her. We never spoke of it, not openly. That would have been too dangerous. But our silences became conversations. Our glances became confessions. And still, I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining things, that surely this was just admiration, maybe even friendship. I tried to bury it again, deeper this time, but the soil inside me had already been turned. The seed was planted, and no amount of denial could stop it from growing. At night, I would lie in my small wooden bed, the blankets stiff from years of use, and stare at the ceiling lost in thought. The silence of the convent used to comfort me. Now, it pressed against my chest like a weight I couldn't shake off. Every word Alina had spoken replayed in my mind, looping endlessly like a hymn I couldn't forget. I started to notice how everything she did affected me. When she laughed, it felt like light breaking through stained glass. When she was distant, it left an ache I couldn't pray away. I began to wonder if this was a test, if God was allowing this feeling to rise so I could prove my strength in resisting it. So I resisted. I fasted longer, prayed harder, spent hours kneeling until my legs went numb. I tried to scrub my heart clean with scripture and silence, but it didn't help. The harder I pushed down the feeling, the stronger it returned, like a wave that retreats only to crash back harder. Have you ever tried to pretend something wasn't there while it consumed every part of your being? That's what it felt like living in a body that didn't want to betray its vows, but a soul that had already surrendered. I remember once catching a cold and being sent to the infirmary for 2 nights. On the second day, Alina came in to bring tea. She was quiet, careful, but I could sense the tension in her breathing, as if just being in the room with me required effort. She sat at the foot of the bed and asked how I was feeling. I wanted to say I was fine, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I said, "I'm tired." After that moment in the infirmary, everything changed between us, not through grand gestures or whispered promises, but in the subtle ways we began to exist path to uma da ultra. We still never spoke of it openly, but the silence between us had shifted. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full. Every shared glance across the prayer hall carried weight. Every brief touch during daily chores sent a quiet tremor through my chest. And the danger of it, the risk, only made it feel more vivid. We started leaving small notes for each other, carefully folded and hidden in the pages of hymn or under clean linens. Nothing explicit, just psalms, reflections, single lines of poetry. But between the lines, we spoke a language only the two of us understood. A simple "The Lord is near to the broken-hearted" could mean "I miss you." A verse about still waters became a message of comfort. It was innocent enough to avoid suspicion, but rich enough to carry everything we couldn't say out loud. Those notes became my lifeline. I would reread them late at night, heart pounding, wondering how something so small could feel so sacred. But even in those quiet exchanges, guilt followed me like a shadow. I began to feel like I was living 2 lives. Outwardly, I was obedient, composed, faithful. Inwardly, I was torn, afraid, and if I'm honest, more alive than I had ever felt before. I questioned everything. Was I betraying my vows? Or was I, for the first time, understanding what love truly meant? I knew what the rules said. I knew what the catechism taught. But I also knew what my soul was whispering, that love, in its purest form, was not evil. It was not shameful. And yet, I couldn't escape the fear. The convent was a place of order. And order does not welcome deviation, not even if that deviation comes from the heart. Every day I feared someone would find a note, that a misplaced glance would give us away, that we would be separated, or worse, punished. And so, we clung to the only thing we had left, our silence. It protected us, it bound us, but it also suffocated us, slowly, day by day. She nodded, and * whispered, "Me too." That moment stretched like a thread between us, fragile, invisible, but strong enough to tie our souls together. And it was in that silence that I knew. Whatever we were feeling wasn't one-sided, but we were trapped. Not in a cell made of stone, but in one built of rules, rituals, and expectations. We had taken vows, not just to God, but to a life that demanded we erase everything human inside us. And yet, in that small infirmary room, I felt more human than I had in years. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew this. Something was beginning that neither of us could stop. One afternoon, everything nearly unraveled. We had been assigned together to clean one of the storage rooms beside the chapel, a narrow, quiet space filled with candle boxes, old linens, and wooden crates covered in dust. It was rare for 2 novices to be alone in such a secluded area, but we didn't question it. We were used to carrying out tasks without hesitation. The silence in that room felt heavier than usual. We worked quietly, side by side, our hands busy but our minds elsewhere. At one point, Alina climbed onto a small ladder to reach a high shelf. I stood just behind her, steadying the base without thinking. When she turned to hand me a bundle of folded cloths, our faces came within inches of each other. Neither of us moved. For a breathless second, the world outside that room disappeared. There were no bells, no prayers, no rules, just us. The moment passed quickly, but not unnoticed. That day, I saw something shift in her eyes. Not fear, not guilt, something deeper. Recognition that whatever we were holding back had already crossed the line we tried so hard to protect. Later that evening, I found a note slipped into the inside pocket of my apron. It was simple, just 3 words, "I feel it." That was all, but it was everything. My hands trembled as I read it. I wasn't alone. I wasn't imagining this. Someone else was carrying the same storm inside their chest. And that realization broke me open in a way I wasn't prepared for. I went to the chapel that night and sat alone in the back pew, the candlelight dancing across the stone walls. I tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. All I could do was whisper, "What do I do now?" over and over again. I didn't hear an answer, no divine voice, no sacred peace, just silence. And yet, in that silence, something became clear. Denying what I felt wasn't bringing me closer to God. It was tearing me apart. I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep hiding. But I also couldn't imagine what would happen if the truth ever came to light. The walls of the convent weren't just physical. They were built on judgment, control, and fear. From that night forward, every encounter with Alina felt magnified. A brush of the hand became a confession. A shared glance during evening prayers turned into a silent embrace. We never crossed any visible line, not yet, but emotionally, we were already entangled. Our bond no longer fit within the narrow definition of sisterhood we had been taught. And still, we said nothing. It was safer that way. At least, that's what we told ourselves. The other sisters began to notice. Not directly, but through small things. A superior once asked why we requested the same work assignments so often. Another questioned why we lingered after Vespers. We smiled. We deflected. But the pressure was building. I started to fear even the smallest interactions. A word spoken too warmly. A pause too long in the hallway. Everything was under a microscope. And the more I tried to act normal, the more unnatural I became. I felt like I was splitting in two. The obedient daughter of the church on one side, and the silent, aching woman who longed for something forbidden on the other. And then, it happened. It was a cold night. The rain had started early, and didn't stop. The convent's roof leaked in places, and a few of us were sent to check for drips in the library. Alina was one of them. So was I. We moved books away from the back wall and placed buckets under the worst leaks. When the others returned to the main hall, Alina and I stayed behind to finish. That's when the lightning cut the power. The room went dark except for the glow of a candle I had placed on the desk. In that flickering light, with the rain hammering the windows, the silence became unbearable. I turned to her and whispered, "I don't know how much longer I can do this." Her eyes filled instantly. She walked toward me slowly, as if any sudden move might break the moment. Then, in a voice so soft I almost didn't hear it, she said, "Me neither." We didn't touch. We didn't even cry. We just stood there, inches apart, in a storm bigger than the one outside. It was the first time either of us had admitted the truth aloud, and it felt both terrifying and holy. After that stormy night in the library, something between us shifted, not in a way anyone else could see, at least not yet, but in the quiet corners of our hearts. The unspoken had now been spoken. There was no way to return to pretending. From then on, every moment we spent juntas carregava novo peso. Even our silences had changed. It wasn't just longing anymore. It was knowing that what we felt was real, mutual, and irreversible, and still, we were careful, too careful. Our fear kept us on edge. We avoided being seen too close. For too long, we exchanged notes more rarely, but that only made our connection more intense. We found meaning in the smallest gestures, a hymn chosen during prayer that reflected something we couldn't say aloud, or a shared glance across the garden that said, "I'm still here." Those were our love letters, invisible to everyone else, obvious only to us. But the closer we grew, the harder it became to maintain the mask. And we knew deep down that eventually someone would see what we were so desperately trying to hide, and that someone came sooner than we expected. Her name was Sister Miriam. She was one of the elder nuns, quiet and sharp-eyed, always moving through the convent with a grace that made her almost ghost-like. I didn't notice her at first, but she noticed us. The way Alina lingered near me in the chapel, the way I paused whenever I heard her voice in the halls. One morning, during cleaning duty, I caught her watching us from the corridor, her expression unreadable. I tried to shake it off, but something told me she had seen too much. That afternoon, I found one of our notes missing, the one I had hidden behind a prayer book in the sacristy. Panic gripped me. I looked everywhere, even hoping maybe I had misplaced it, but deep down, I knew someone had it. And if it was Sister Miriam, there would be consequences. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, replaying every moment we had ever shared, wondering if it had all been a mistake. Not because I regretted loving Alina, I never did, but because I realized the walls were closing in. Key morning, after the note went missing, I was summoned, not by name, not with accusation, just a soft knock at the door of my dormitory, and the words, "The Mother Superior would like to speak with you." My heart dropped. I knew what it meant. I dressed slowly, tying my habit with trembling fingers, praying that somehow this was about something else, anything else. But deep inside, I already knew. The walk to her office felt like a funeral procession. The halls were colder than usual. My feet felt heavy. When I entered, she was seated, hands folded, eyes steady. On the desk in front of her was the note. "Open, read, exposed, sit, child," she said, not unkindly. I obeyed. She didn't shout, she didn't scold. Instead, she asked one question. "Do you understand what you've done?" I couldn't speak. My throat was dry, my eyes burned, but I refused to cry. She continued, "Emotions can be confusing, especially for the young. But the life we've chosen requires sacrifice, discipline. You know this." I nodded, barely. She looked down at the note again. "This cannot continue. You understand that?" It wasn't a question. It was a sentence. I left her office with my legs shaking, my chest hollow. Outside, the sky was gray. I walked back to my room like a ghost. I didn't see Alina for the rest of that day. I wasn't sure if she had been called in to. I wasn't even sure if she was being punished, but something had shifted. I could feel it in the air. That night, during Vespers, I looked across the chapel and found her seated 2 rows away, distant, still, with her head bowed. She didn't look up once. I wanted to run to her, to explain, to hold her, but I couldn't. Everything in me was being crushed beneath the weight of rules I no longer believed in. The silence that once protected us had now turned against us. The next morning, my schedule was changed. I was reassigned to the laundry room, alone. No more garden duties, no more kitchen tasks, no more shared assignments with her. It was their way of separating us without a scene. No confrontation, just control. But what they didn't know was that love, once awakened, cannot be erased with a rule. It lingers, it waits, and sometimes it fights back. The days that Sagaram felt like walking through fog. Everything looked the same on the outside, the same prayers, the same corridors, the same cold stone walls, but inside me, everything had changed. I went through the motions in silence, folding linens alone, eating without appetite, kneeling at chapel with a heart too loud to pray. They had done what they always did, removed the problem. Instead of asking where it came from, I wasn't punished openly. There were no public rebukes or punishments. That wasn't how the convent worked. They punished with absence, with isolation, with invisible distance, and it worked for a while. I didn't see Alina for days. I didn't hear her voice, didn't catch a single glance, but every corner of that place still reminded me of her. The stairs we used to clean together, the garden we once laughed in, even the smell of rosemary in the kitchen brought her face back to my mind. It wasn't just longing, it was grief. Grief for something we never got to fully live. Something beautiful that was pulled from the earth before it could bloom. Then, one night, I heard a knock at my door. Soft, barely audible. I froze. No one ever came to our rooms at night. I opened it slowly, and there she was, Alina, eyes red, face pale. "I just needed to see you," she whispered. We didn't hug, we didn't touch. We just stood there, both of us holding back tears. She said, "They told me to forget you." I said nothing, because I couldn't promise her I would. She handed me a small folded paper, a final note. I didn't read it then. I just closed the door, knowing that this was goodbye, not because we wanted it, but because the choice had already been made for us. That night, I read her last words under the dim light of my bedside lamp. She wrote, "What we had was not wrong. It was real, and I will carry it with me wherever I go." I held that paper to my chest and wept silently, not just for the love we lost, but for the version of myself I had to bury in that place, the version that once believed love had to hide to be holy. Time moved differently after she left. Each day felt longer, heavier, as if the convent itself had absorbed the silence between us. I tried to convince myself that I could go on, that if I just prayed harder, worked harder, the ache would fade. But grief isn't something you can scrub away like dust on a chapel floor. It lingers. It clings to you. I missed her in everything, in the hymns we used to sing, in the corner of the garden where she once planted rosemary. Even the scent of old pages in the library made my chest tighten. I was haunted, not by sin, but by a love I wasn't allowed to mourn. There was no funeral, no farewell, no permission to cry, just the unspoken rule: move on, forget, obey. And I tried. God knows I tried. But at night, when the lights went out and the hallways went still, I would reach for the last note she gave me, the one I kept hidden inside the lining of my pillow. I would read it slowly, whisper her words into the dark, and remind myself that what we had was real, even if the world pretended it wasn't. Have you ever loved someone in silence? Have you ever been told that your heart was wrong, that something so gentle, so honest, must be buried and forgotten? If you have, then you understand what I was going through. I began to question not just my place in the convent, but my place in faith. How could something that brought me closer to compassion, to understanding, to truth, be a violation? I wasn't rebelling. I wasn't trying to destroy tradition. I had simply loved, and in doing so, I had crossed the line drawn by those who feared what they couldn't control. That realization burned in me. It grew louder than the bells, sharper than the silence. I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep offering prayers from a heart that had been silenced. I knew, deep down, that something had to change. Either I would disappear inside this place, or I would have to find the strength to leave it. And that thought, that terrifying, impossible thought, became the seed of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It didn't happen all at once. I didn't pack a bag in the middle of the night or storm out through the front gates. That's not how things work in a convent. There are no dramatic exits, only silent disappearances. Sisters who leave are rarely spoken of again. Their names are erased gently, quietly, like chalk from a board. But the decision to leave, that was loud. It echoed inside me day after day, growing stronger each time I saw my reflection in the chapel glass and didn't recognize the woman. Staring back, I began to realize that staying meant losing more of myself every day. My laughter, my voice, my truth, all of it was being chipped away in the name of obedience. I prayed for guidance, not expecting a miracle, just a sign that I wasn't losing my mind. And one morning, while sweeping the front corridor, I overheard two visitors speaking to a young postulant. They were from a shelter outside the city, a place for women rebuilding their lives. One of them said, "Sometimes God's voice sounds like your own heart, finally speaking clearly." I froze. That was my sign. From that moment, I began to prepare myself not just practically, but emotionally. I started waking earlier to think, to breathe, to sit with the weight of my choice. I wrote a letter to the Mother Superior, though I didn't give it to her right away. I visited the garden one last time, and tucked a rosary Alina had once given me beneath the soil near the rosemary plant she loved. I whispered a prayer, not for forgiveness, but for courage. And when the day finally came, it wasn't stormy or dramatic. It was calm, clear skies. I waited until evening, after the last bell. I left my room in silence, carrying nothing but the letter in my hand and a single word in my heart: enough. I placed the letter on her desk and walked out the side gate. No one stopped me. No one called my name. And as the gate closed behind me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. The wind on my face, unfiltered, unjudged. I was no longer a sister of the convent. I was simply me. I wish I could tell you that everything got easier after I left. That freedom came like a sunrise and erased the ache I had carried for so long. But healing isn't linear, and leaving didn't erase the years I had given to that place. It didn't erase the guilt, or the questions, or the longing that still lingered in my chest like a half-finished hymn. For weeks, I lived with almost nothing. A friend of my family let me stay in a spare room above her bakery. I would wake up early to help knead dough. My hands busy, my thoughts louder than ever. The world outside the convent was faster, brighter, noisier than I remembered. I felt like a stranger in my own life. And yet, each morning, I woke up and looked at the sky, not through a stained glass window, but with my own eyes, and I reminded myself, I chose this. I chose to live in truth, even if that truth was uncomfortable, even if it meant being misunderstood, even if it meant never seeing her again. But in that honesty, something beautiful began to grow, a kind of peace that no rule or robe had ever been able to offer me. One afternoon, while walking through the open-air market, I passed by a small second-hand bookstore. Something drew me inside. The air smelled like old paper and rain. I wandered the aisles until I found a worn copy of a poetry collection, the same one Alina once quoted from in one of her notes. My heart caught in my throat. I bought it, went home, and read the pages by candlelight. Her words came back to me like echoes, soft and steady. What we had was not wrong, it was real. And for the first time, I believed it without hesitation. I realized that love, even love born in silence, in fear, in hiding, is still love. And that love, when true, leaves a mark no institution can erase. I never saw her again. I don't know where she is now. Maybe she stayed, maybe she left, maybe she carries a piece of me the way I carry her. But what I do know is this: I am no longer hiding. I no longer pray to be changed. I pray to remain true. And if someone out there is listening, someone who has loved in silence, someone who's been told their heart is wrong, know this: your love is not your shame. It is your story. So now, after all these years, this is me telling my truth out loud, not in whispers behind closed doors, not in folded notes or secret glances, but here, fully, honestly, vulnerably. I gave so much of my life to a silence that nearly destroyed me. I obeyed out of fear. I stayed out of duty. I erased myself in the name of holiness. But love, real love, doesn't ask you to disappear. It doesn't demand your voice. It doesn't come with shame. And I think somewhere deep inside, you already know that. If you're still here, still listening, maybe you needed to hear this story. Maybe you've been carrying your own hidden truth, a memory, a name, a feeling you've never dared speak. Maybe you've been waiting for someone else to say it first. So let me say it for both of us. You are not alone. And what you feel, what you've lived, it matters. Even if the world calls it wrong. Even if the people around you pretend not to see it. Even if you've been told to bury it, bless it, or burn it. Let me ask you something and be honest. Even if it's just with yourself. Have you ever hidden a part of your heart because you thought it would make you unworthy? Have you ever silenced your love to survive? If so, I see you. I've been you. And I want you to know, you are not broken. You are not unholy. You are human. And your truth deserves space in this world. I don't regret loving her. I never will, because even if it cost me everything I knew, it gave me myself in return. And no vow, no convent, no rule book can take that away. So if this story touched you, don't keep it locked inside. Share it, carry it, let it be the permission you've been waiting for. And if you're brave enough, leave a comment below, just a single word, free, no explanation needed, just that. So others who come here in silence will see that they're not alone either. Thank you for listening to my story. I pray you find the courage to live yours fully, loudly, and without shame.